Okay, and I will start to share my screen with you. I want to say sorry, but my voice is not so good today. So if you don't understand something, please just tell me, okay? I'm a little sick. I think this conference was too much for my body. And today my voice is not so good, but I hope that you can understand me, okay? But if you have any doubt, just raise your hand, open your microphone, okay? Um, okay. In this class, we will finish the topics about the soil description, okay? And after the last few topics, I will share with you all an exercise about the soil description and how these properties could help us to understand and interpret the data about soil, okay? First, we need to understand that beyond soil, we also should describe the position and location of the soil profile. And we also should describe the relief and landforms. Oh, just a moment. Someone is asking to enter. Okay. So we also should describe the relief and the landforms where we dig, where we trying to map a soil, where we are describing a soil profile, okay? And we have several reliefs, several landforms, several geoforms. We will present some of them. We shouldn't describe them, or we don't need to describe them in a lot of details, because some of people that work with soil doesn't have a deep geomorphological formation, a deep geomorphological knowledge. But if you can describe or you can identify some reliefs and landforms, it's good enough to have a good soil description, okay? Of course, if you can describe better or in several details about the landforms or the landscape that you are describing the soil profile, better are your soil description. You can easily understand some process, but we will present some of the simple or basic details that we need to register in this description of the soil profile. And the first of all is the elevation. Of course, it's quite easily to describe, to register the elevation today. It's just the weight related to the mean sea level. So with your cell phone or a GPS, you can register the quantity or how many meters your soil profile it's above mean sea level. This is quite important because the elevation help us to understand some leaching process, some alluviation or migration of clay and other materials through soil profile. Okay, of course, higher elevations tend to produce higher leaching or higher alluviation. So it's quite important to register that. Just a moment. Someone is asking to enter. Okay. And we also should describe the slope spect. Slope spect, it's only the direction of the face of the slope. And this is quite important, especially to dry lands, to dry forests, or even the savannas, because if you have higher landscapes, if you have highlands, if you have an iceberg, if you have a hill, The direction of the slopes influence a lot the vegetation and the genesis of soil profile, because the quantity or how many sunlight hours some some phase have comparing to other phase could be quite related to evapotranspiration process. And of course, some phases receive more influence of air masses, so they could be more humid, they could be humid than another or other slope face, and can have deeper soil profiles. Okay, so if you have a landscape something like this, it's very flat, and you have an iceberg here, or highland, or a mountain, this face, this face could receive more air masses and could present a denser vegetation cover, a higher developed soils, more leached, with a stronger structure, stronger grade, and deeper soil profiles compared with this phase that could be drier with less dense vegetation and shallow soils. So the slope spec is quite important. Just a moment. Someone is asking to enter the class. Oh, the asking. Okay. And we also should register, we should note the slope gradient in the area. That's only the inclination of the terrain, of the slope. Okay, it's quite easy to do that. If you have a slope here, you just need to register this inclination according to the horizontal plane. So let's try to draw something better. Okay, and a horizontal plane, it's not so horizontal, okay? But imagine that we have a horizontal plane here. I need to register how many degrees are the slope. And of course, this influence the erosion process, some leaching process, runoff, a lot of processes that influence the vegetation cover and also influence soil genesis, the process that act in soil. How higher is the slope gradient? I probably will find shallow soils, and if you have a gentle or low slope gradient, probably you have deeper soils with stronger grade than that on high slope gradient. We also can describe, we can note the relative slope position. And so if you have a slope here, we can easily describe at least three regions, three parts in this slope. We can cut it in three phases. And this is the upper third of the slope. This is the middle third of the slope. And this is the low third of the slope. Of course, in the low third of the slope, we imagine that more deeper soils can be found, or even some soils with colluvium and alluvium sediments. Some lifted discontinuity can be found here because some sediments that was eroded from the upper areas could be deposited here. In the upper regions, we usually found shallow soils that is intensely eroded, and we can find some materials, some rocks, or even some harder materials that can be easily found quite close to the surface. And in the middle slope, we also can find eroded soils. Sometimes we can also find soils that are not so eroded. It depends on the geometry of the slope. We can talk about this in the next steps, in the next slides. But it is generally, we can find generally soils that are not so eroded comparing to the upper third of the slope. So here we have shallow soils that can also host buried soils. Here we have a moderate erosion of these areas, and here we have a high erosion of these areas because we have higher gradient and we have higher altitude. We also can describe the geometry of these slopes, the shape of this slope, and it can be linear, something like this. You have a high angle here. You can find a convex, something like here, that distribute the water. When rainfall impact this area, the rain and the water start to infiltrate in the soil, and the runoff, surface runoff, is not so higher comparing to this slope. And we also can find some concave slopes like this, that rain is concentrated in surface. So we have a lot of surface runoff, and you have a little quantity of infiltration, water infiltration. So in convex slopes, you favor the infiltration of water. In concave slopes, you favor the runoff, the surface runoff of water. And linear slopes, you have the moderate, the median landscape. You have some infiltration, and you have some runoff, surface runoff. Okay, these two conditions are quite common, the convex and concave slopes, and this linear shape is not so common. It's typical from tectonic areas, but we also can find in some areas that we have different rocks, like if I can find here some sandstones, and here we can find some granites. So we have different rocks in contact, so we can find this linear shape, but these two shapes are most common, are the most examples that we can find in the landscape, okay? And also we can find a surface that uniform, that only have one shape, or we also can find one or two or more shapes. So I can find some slopes that has a convex and a concave slope at the same time. So this region, I found a convex shape that favored the infiltration of water and a low surface runoff. And here I have a concave slope, a concave shape that favored, that induced the concentration of water in the surface, and a low quantity of infiltration. So it's quite common to find two or more shapes of a slope. We also can describe the different landforms of a hill. So if I draw something like this, I can describe here in the top, the crest. The crest is the upper area that divides the water. So it's the interflow of the area. So water migrates to here and water migrates to here is the crest, which divide the watershed. Okay. We have, of course, the slope, all this area. That's the inclination of the hill, and which connect the crest to this area that is the base slope. Base slope is that area that receive all sediments that are eroded from crest to this area. So all materials that could be eroded in all this slope, all this area tends to accumulate in the base slope. So this material could be eroded in the upper areas and start to accumulate in these areas. So it's quite common that base slope hosts buried soils. And in this area, we have a lot of erosion, okay? It's quite common to find in the slope some areas with rock in the surface. So if I can find in this area something like a surface of rock, a granite or basalt or even sandstone, something like that, that I can see the rock in the surface, this area, I can name it as a free face. So in a slope that we can find something that's composed by rocks in the surface, fresh hot rock in the surface, I call it as a free face. Free face, a face without soil, okay? And this slope, we can also classify it depending on the geometry. And this draw represent better what I want to say. So if you see these lines are the topography lines, and they show us the crest, the top of the area. Here we can find some rocks in the surface, so they are free faces, okay? Here in the base of the area, where colluvium and alluvium are sedimented, we call this as a base slope, and all this area between these two areas, the crest and the base slope, it's called slope. But we also can distinguish between a head slope, a nose slope, and a side slope according to the geometry. If I have a concave surface, like a concave geometry, I have a head slope. This kind of geometry tends to increase the concentration of water in the same point, because all this surface runoff will drain to the same point, okay? So a head slope tends to concentrate water in the same point. The nose slope has a convex geometry, this kind of geometry. So all the water that rain and fall in this area will drain to different positions. So the water drain to different directions, different points. It's not drained to the same point. It's different from the head slope. And in the side slope, all the rainfall, all the rain that fall in this area has a parallel drain. So you didn't have the same point, you don't drain to the same point, but you didn't also diverge the direction. They have the same direction, but they are parallel between them. So we can describe the soil if it has in the crest in higher position, in a base slope, that soil is formed on colluvium or alluvium sediments, or it has in a slope, and which kind of slope? A concave, a convex, or a linear slope. A area that water convert to the same point, an area that water diverge, or an area with water migrates in parallel channels, in parallel directions. Okay? We also can describe some positions of the soil in a high slope. If I didn't have a crest, if I have a surface, a plateau in the surface, like something like this. So you have a hill, but you don't have a crest. You don't have an interflow that is something like this. In this case, this flat area is called summit of the hill. And this area that has a gentle slope is called shoulder. And commonly we can find in the shoulder the exposition of some hard rocks or some iron crusts or silicon crusts or some rocks that are very resistant to weathering. So it's quite common to identify different materials in the shoulder and in the summit and in the base and other areas of the slope. So it's common to identify different materials when we have a shoulder. If you have a kind of landscape like this, it's quite common that this area, the shoulder of the hill, we can identify different materials, different parent materials from the other areas. In Brazil and even in Africa, it's quite common to identify in the shoulder iron crusts, iron-rich materials that represent a layer of highly resistant materials, and so we don't register deeply weathering or erosion, and it sustains all this landscape, all these highlands, okay, all this summit. And the soils in the summit are developed from another materials like sandstones or other materials, okay? So the summit, this plateau, this low angulous areas, the shoulder, the areas that we can find highly resistant materials, the back slope, that the area we can identify the middle third of the slope, the area that we have a lot of erosion and we don't have any material that has a high resistance to weathering, against weathering, we can find the foot slope, the area we can identify some materials that eroded from the highlands, from these higher parts, but this area we can identify some slope, so slope angular is not so flat like the two slope. The two slope is that area that we can identify a lot of alluvium or colluvium, a lot of material that was eroded from high areas, but slope, it's very, very flat. We don't have a highly convexity here. We can just find a flat relief. We also can describe soils in terraces. So it's quite interesting, it's quite important to describe which kind of landforms and reliefs we can identify in these areas. And it's quite easy to understand how these terraces could evaluate against time. If you can imagine something like this, we have a hill with slope, and here we have a river, and this river in the wet season, in the rainfall season, he tried to migrate from these higher conditions. Oh, let me draw again, please. I'm not so good drawing, you can imagine. So let me try again, just a moment. Okay, it's what I want to draw. Imagine that I have a river here, and this river is always pouring this area because he wants to achieve the sea level that's here. So he's eroding this area and trying to dig this valley. So valley start to be more close to the sea level. And when the river is quite close to the sea level, he start to increase the, not more the wave, but the width of the channel. So it start to increase the size of the valley. No more the wave, because the sea level is here, and it start to erode in a lateral direction, not more in a vertical direction. In this case, you can form a vast valley, and the river could be very big, like the Amazon River, something like that. But if you have a climatic change, or if you have a tectonic change and the sea level decrease and achieve a new level, so it's the first sea level, and now it's the second, and now the sea level, it's something like 100 or 50 meters below the first level. The river will start to dig, to erode again this valley. So it start to do this. and now second level. And now we have the exposition of a material which was deposited by the rivers during its floating here. So in the past, when river is floating in this area, of course, it deposits a lot of sand, silt, and clay, a lot of sediment materials that now it's exposed, is on the surface, and of course, we can find some soils here. And in general, this occurs several times. So it's quite common to identify something like this. That we have the slope, and we have a terrace, and you have a new terrace, and you have a new terrace, and the river is here. So if you have this flat surface here, and here, and here, and even here, this indicates that in the past, river run in this area, in this topography, in this altitude, but it's coming down to here, cross time, because it registers some climatic or tectonic change. And this is the oldest terrace, the second oldest, the third oldest, the fourth oldest, and now is the river. And if the river goes down again, it will form a new terrace, a new raised terrace. It's quite common to identify these flat areas close to rivers and, of course, close to the sea. It's quite common to see these areas that's quite close to the coast, okay? And here we have a better draw than mine, that we can see this flat surface, T1, this T2, and this T3 surfaces. And we can see that T1, we can identify in these two areas that was cut by this river. So in the past, this river deposited sediments in these highlands, in this higher area, and after that, he started to erode its deposition, its materials, its sediments that in the past he deposited, okay, and create a new surface that we call T2, and it also started to erode the material and deposited a new material, T3, and now here it is creating a new floodplain, we call T4. And if this river go down again, T4 will create a new terrace. We didn't be anymore a floodplain, and we start to create, it's called a terrace and a raised terrace, okay? And this river will create a new floodplain. So, especially to people who study paleosols or study geomorphological evolution of the landscape, these forms are very common, and we also should describe soil in these areas to identify these materials and how old they are and several other materials. Oh, this is sandy texture, and the soil profile has a clay texture, and this has a sandy texture again. So we have in this situation a river with a high energy, and here we have a clay texture. So the river was very calm and deposited clay materials with a lot of organic matter, for example, And in this situation, we have again a river with a lot of energy, a high energy, and we can imagine when can we identify a river with a lot of energy? For example, when we have a lot of rain, when we have a wet climate, and when we can identify a river with low energy, when we have a dry climate. So maybe these different terraces could express different climate conditions, but it's not what we should do right now. We just need to describe, okay, the soil is in a rised terrace in the first and second and 30, or the oldest, the second oldest, and other, and blah, 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 okay? So we can describe the soil in the risers, in the riser terraces, or in these walls that we call treat. So we can describe soils in the riser or treat, okay? We can also describe some soils in mountains. So we can describe in the mountain top. That's not the same that we call the crest. The crest is here in the summit, are here, depending on the relief in this area. If I have a flat surface, we call the summit. If I have a mountains relief, something like a not flat surface, we call a crest, okay? Generally, we can find rocks in the surface, materials that are suffer transport in a short dimension, in a short distance, or even shallow soils, because we have a lot of erosion, okay? We can find the slope in these positions where we can identify the mountain slopes, and we can also describe the upper third, the middle third, and or the center third and the lower third of the slopes. And all these areas, we can identify different kinds or different quantities of colluvium and alluvium materials. Of course, these colluvium packs, these colluvium layers are deeper in the lower third. We also can identify free faces, areas in the slope that we have rock and the surface, okay? We have the mountain base, that area with we can identify a higher depth of this colluvium and alluvium materials, where we can identify the materials that was eroded from higher positions to the lower positions. And of course, when soils are deeper, but they are also buried. We can describe soils in flat plains, and it's quite common in dry areas to describe this flat plains. And in savannas, it's also quite common. We can find some rises, some areas that it's high in these flat plains. They are generally related to highly resistant rocks, like I can find here some sandstones that are rich in iron, or I can find some igneous rocks, and they form Einzelbergs or something like that, represent a higher area in this flat region. We can find the deep regions that are depressions in these flat plains. These deep regions commonly could be related to softer rocks, rocks that could be easily weathered, or even those rocks that were intensively fragmented by faults. So if I have several faults here, it's easily to wafer the rock, and this could easily form a dip. Okay, it's quite common to identify this dip because they are generally have a denser vegetation cover, and we can find a denser forest in the dip comparing to the rise, and of course tuff. The tuff is this region of the flat surface that's not higher conditions and not lower conditions. So the tuff is the main surface that we can identify in these flat plains. In general, the tuff, it's also understood as a erosion surface. Okay, that this surface created by erosion. In some areas, in some cases, we also can describe the microrelief, and the microrelief is this kind of forms that we can identify in some soils. They are quite common in the vertisols, because this vertisols has a lot of clay, and especially a lot of high activity clays that suffer, shrink, and swell very intensely. And they create this kind of relief, but a micro relief. It's not formed by biological activity. It's just a shrink and swell process. And of course, we have micro high areas, the top of this relief. We have the micro low areas, the valley, the depression formed by shrink and swell process, and we have the micro slope, this continual area that connect the micro high and the micro slope of the micro relief. We can't find this in soils with low clay content or low clay activity, so it's not so common, but we can find especially in dry lands when soils are not so wafered or not so leached. Okay? Okay, someone have any question about how to describe this relief and landforms properties? Mr. Dima, open your microphone.
Okay. Good evening. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Can you
Uh,
hear me? Can you hear me?
oh, okay.
Okay. Is there really a difference between relief and landforms?
Okay.
Is there any distinct difference between the two?
Yes. In general, we call the landforms only the surface of the area. Like a landform is a mountain, it's a hill, it's a depression, it's a graben, it's a horst. Um, and the relief is the composition of the area. So you call, okay, there is a tormented relief, a relief with a lot of hills and valleys, with a lot of landforms that could be positive or negative forms. Okay? Oh, okay. It's a very good
My
question.
another my another question is is there difference between soil formation and sediment accumulation?
Yes, yes. It's quite different. And could you or someone could help me to understand how can we differentiate sediment accumulation and formation of soil? Try to remember how can we define soil and how can we differentiate sediment and soil. If you remember, soil is composed by beds, by aggregates, and soil should has structure, should has horizons and or layers. Sediments, they shouldn't present pads. They don't have to present pads. Sediments are only formed by erosion and deposition of materials. But to present a soil, you should have the interaction between the soil formation factors. So to create soil, you should interact organisms, time, relief, parent material, and climate, of course. You should present a morphology should which represent all this interaction. So you can identify a layer with some aggregates and some color and some structure. Okay, in this layer, I can easily find a lot of roots and voids, which suggest that bioturbation is quite important to formation of these horizons. And in this below horizon, in the B horizon, in the subsurface, I can find some beds, some aggregates, which has a shiny surface, which suggests that clay are moving from the surface to the subsurface horizons and creating this shiny surface. Or the material are suffering shrink and shell, and in this case, they are creating a shiny surface, a flat and shiny surface in these materials. These are formation of soil process. And to formate sediments, you just need to erode from the highlands and deposit in the lowlands. You don't need to create more complex process. It's just deposition. Okay? Okay, okay. Has anyone any more question? No? Okay. And now I will share with you all some links, okay, for some questions. You don't need to worry, it's not an exam, it's just some questions that help you to understand how the soil description could help us to understand what the soil means in the evolution of the landscape. Okay, so I will share the link in the chat and I will count 5 minutes. So please answer this question in 5 minutes and send the answer. In the end of the 5 minutes, I will return to the chat or return to the class and we will discuss about the question. So you have 5 minutes to answer the question, and after that, we return to the class and discuss that question. Okay? You can stay in the class. You don't need to get out of the class. You could be in the class, not a problem. I will turn off my microphone and my camera, but I'm here if you have some question. JJ, I didn't understand the question. Just call me. I will be here waiting. And if you have some any question, just say to me. But in the end of the class, I will open my camera and my microphone again, say, okay, everybody, come back to the class, and we'll discuss about the question. Okay? So 5 minutes to answer the question, and we return here. So I will share another link with another question. We have 4 questions, very easily. It's just to help you to understand how the soil description is important to understand the soil evolution, how soil help us to understand the landscape evolution. Okay? So let me catch the first link. Just a moment. Okay. Okay. Copy. And I will share in the chat. Just a moment. Here. So please access the link and answer the question. Okay, so we are back, and now we will discuss about the first question. Let me share my screen just a moment. Okay, my connection is not so good today, but it's working. Here, the first question: to respect a sand texture in a horizon which has a very plastic and very stick consistency, explain your answer. As I follow the answers that you give to me, you don't expect a sand texture in a horizon that has this kind of consistency, because very plastic and very stick horizon generally present a high content of clay, and especially clays of high activity, because our very plastic and very stick soil indicates that the particles which compose the fine fraction of soil has a high affinity between them, and a high affinity between them and another object like my hand, like my fingers. And to have a high affinity between particles and particles with another material, we should present a particle with a high surface, a high specific surface, a high surface for interaction. And materials that has a high size like sand didn't present a high specific surface. In opposition, clay particles present a high specific surface and could present this kind of consistency. Could be very plastic and very stick, and especially the high clay, because they present higher specific surfaces between all the clays. So we don't expect that a horizon which has a very plastic and very stick consistent present a sand texture, but in opposition present a clay texture. Okay, I hope that everyone follow this question. And anyone has a doubt about this, or anyone want to say something about this question? Quite easy. Please, Nadima, open your microphone.
Okay. Jojo, is this still possible according to what I answered? Say that, although I said the clay content will still be low, and when wet, there's no way it can stick to the hands, one. Two, can you also say the organic matter content of that soil, of the sandy soil, will be low? Is it also correct?
Oh, very good questions. First of all, we can present some soils that are very plastic and very sticky, and present a not so high content of clay, and present a loamic texture. But in this case, in this loamic texture, in the dominance of uh, uh, sand and silt and clay, you should present clays with high activity. It's quite common in dry lands that you have a loamic texture, but they are very stick and very plastic. So if the high content of clay, or the content of clay is not high, but these clays are high activity clays. So you can present this kind of consistency. And in some cases, if you have a high content of clay, if they present a low activity, you present a very plastic or a plastic consistency, but you couldn't present a non-plastic or a non-stick consistency if you have a high content of clay, even if they are low activity clays. Okay, and the organic matter, in some cases, they are present in the clay fraction, and they could influence the consistency of the material, but in general, they don't influence a lot because in general, the organic matter content is not so high, especially when we identify the clay fraction, okay? So they could influence the evaluation of the consistency, but they in general don't influence so much. And the mineral phase, it's more important to this evaluation, okay? When we are discussing or working with organic horizons or organic soils, or even in the surface horizon, the organic carbon or the organic matter contents higher, and they could influence the consistency of the material. You can understand if that material is hydrophobious or not according to its consistency. If it is non-plastic or non-stick, probably the organic material is hydrophobious. It don't get very well with water. You can mix the material easily because the organic matter is hydrophobic. So if you are working or studying our organic layer or our organic soil, so the organic matter could influence the consistency. And if you have a non-plastic and non-stick material, probably you can understand that that material is hydrophobic. Of course, you need to measure this in a lab. We have some analysis that we will describe in the next classes about this, but it's a good start that show you, okay, I should do this kind of analysis in the lab because probably this material is hydrophobic. Okay. And the next question is from someone's have the Heiser rent, the Olan religion. Please open your microphone.
Yes. Based on the question, I think I literally just focused on the plasticity of the soil, which is from the meaning. I think it should have, just as you've explained, should have high clay content, and especially when wet, you should be able to form. You should be able to fold it into different shapes and maybe form ribbon or form a ring. So expectedly, sand content can't have that kind of property to form into shape. So that means a soil that have the characteristics of high plasticity shouldn't be have high sandy texture. That was just my answer. Yeah.
Mhm. Uh, Please, I did not understand and the end of your speak. You answer what? Could you repeat,
I
please?
said the based on the question on the characteristics of sandy texture. So based on the inability to form into shape, so it shouldn't have that a high plastic characterization shouldn't have high sand content, but it should have high clay content instead.
Okay, okay. Okay. Yes, the consistency of the material is not a measurement of the texture of the soils, of course, but it represents the texture and the activity of clays and the organic matter, and we can have a general answer about this, all these materials, all these properties. So we we always should understand that the consistency of the material in the dry, the moist, and wet conditions represent all these parameters, all these soil properties. So it's quite useful to us to measure the consistency in the dry, the wet, and the moist conditions to have a consistent response that couldn't be influenced by some conditions or by our experience. Okay, so it's quite important to describe this. And of course, we have another properties that could help us to understand if I measure the texture, the soil, and if I measure the consistency, I can understand very easily. Like I said before, if I have a loamic texture and a very plastic or a very stick consistency, I can understand that I don't have a lot of clay, but probably the clay in this material has a high activity. So help us to understand how kind of minerals or rich minerals can I identify in this sample in the lab. So okay, in the lab, I will looking for high activity clays, and probably I will have primary minerals in the sand fraction because the leaching and the wafering is not so high. But if I have a clay texture and I have a plastic material or moderately plastic material, okay, probably I don't have a high activity clay, and probably I present a low activity clay, and in the sand fraction, probably I will have only high resistance minerals like quartz. Okay, so let's start the second question. I will share just a moment. Okay, the link is here, more 5 minutes. Sorry, I send a link with the other questions. Please don't worry, just answer the second question, okay?
JJ, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes? Yes, please.
Hello, JJ. We have to answer the rest of the questions before we can submit it because they are required, not just question 2 alone.
Oh, let me share the link again. Just a moment. Let me
All
see
right.
if something wrote. Copy.
Hello, JJ.
Let me try again. Just a moment.
Hello? JJ, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Without
You
answering
can
other
call.
questions,
You can say
one can,
what?
as in without answering others, one can submit. Did you
Um,
understand?
I think
Yes, yes.
I
sent
answered
on
question
that link.
number 2. To submit, the thing will still ask you to answer number 3.
Uh-huh.
Try to check the second link. Try to copy what you've done. He has sent another link for you to do. I think the second link is
Yes.
working fine. Yeah.
You said, okay, we send the link, please.
Yeah, there's another link which is sent now for the same question.
Okay.
Yes.
Try to check it. But make sure you copy it before you close it so that you won't lose what you've done. Ese message ninja imale. Ah.
Okay. We are coming to the class and now we'll discuss about the second question. Let me share screen just a moment. Sorry. Okay. And the second question is granular and prismatic are different types of structure. If you remember, the granular are the circle or quite circle shape structures, and the prismatic are the vertical structures. There are different shapes or different types, and based on these different types and different origin process, how they could help us to think about biological activity, climate, and clay activity. To respond this question, we should remember how granular and prismatic structures are formed. Granular structures are formed by interaction between organic matter and clay minerals, especially kaolinite and iron oxides. So to form a granular structure, I should present a high content of organic matter and present clay minerals that present a low activity clay like kaolinite and iron oxides. In the opposition, prismatic structures are formed by shrink and shell process, which present a high plastic and stick materials, and the formation of structures are especially common in dry areas when we have a high leaching and we have a market season, a market dry season. So we can understand that we have different shapes, different types of structure, and they represent different landscapes or different compositions of soil formation factors. And so it's quite easily to understand how they could tell us about biological activity, climate, and clay activity. As I said, the granular structure, it's commonly found in with minerals with low activity, with kaolinite and iron oxides like goethite, hematite. And generally, the granular structure, it's commonly found in areas with have a wet climate. So on savannas and Brazilian rainforest and several rainforests, we can also find this kind of structure. Granular structure, it's highly common in surface horizons because the biological activity, because this kind of structure needs a high intensively soil, a high intensively erosion, I'm sorry, a highly intensive horizon that was bioturbate, that was mixed by organisms. So the granular, it's quite common to surface horizons because we should present an intense biological mixed horizon. Okay? Someone asked me, someone raised their hand. Oh, Nedima, please open your microphone.
JJ, please. You said this prismatic is formed by shrink and swell process, but this prismatic is normally seen
Okay.
in area that is not deeply withered. I don't understand it
Oh,
too.
oh, okay. No problem. No problem. Let me just turn off my so I can
Did
hear
you hear
you.
what I said?
Oh, okay.
Okay,
This. Mm-hmm,
you said this prismatic is
mm-hmm.
formed by shrink and swell process, but prismatic shows area that is not also deeply withered.
Okay,
I
okay.
don't understand the two features.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Did
Let
you
me share
understand
my
my question?
screen. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Just a moment. And here. Okay, here. Okay. These are prismatic structures, as you can see, and they are high vertically elongated structures. And these materials are formed during the dry season and wet season, the variation of water inside into the soil. When you have high activity clays, you have minerals that change its size according the quantity of water inside in between these minerals. So during the wet season, when you have a lot of water inside the soil, these minerals, they change of size, they shrink, they start to increase, they get large. And during the dry season, they decrease its size and they decrease the quantity of water. So the process of increase of size and decrease of size change the volume of soil and create some cracks in the soil, because when you decrease the size of these minerals, you decrease the volume of soil, you start to create some cracks in soil, and especially vertical cracks, because you have a gradient of water in the soil. Let me draw this so could be easier to understand. Okay, just I'm sharing my screen. Yes, I'm sharing my screen. So you can see here. Imagine that you have a surface here, okay, in a area that you have a lot of high activity clays, and start to rain, and the water get into the soil. So all materials, it increase the size, increase the volume, and all particles here expanded in all directions. Imagine that you can see a clay here. Of course, you should magnify this like 4,000 times for see a clay, but imagine that each clay in this soil expand in all directions at the same time, okay? So the volume of soil change, increase, okay? And when comes the dry season, you don't have the rain, you have the sun and a high evapotranspiration. You get your soil dry, and now you start to create some cracks in the soil. And why these cracks are formed? Because now the clays decrease its size. It's not expanding anymore, but they are decreasing in size because these materials decrease and increase of size according the quantity of water between the clays and into the clays. So we change the volume of clays, and consequently we change the volume of soil, because these materials could expand, increase and decrease its volume, its size, okay? Sand and silt fractions couldn't do that, only the clay fraction, okay? And when you get dry, when soil get dry, the crack start to occur, and the crack start to create some pads and some voids. So you can easily see here some cracks, large cracks like these ones, and some cracks get not so deep, is not so large, but you start to create cracks. And because of these cracks, you can see here a pad, an aggregate that now was formed by the variation of quantity of water inside the soil in the dry and wet season. Could you understand now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, it's good to know, because it is very important to understand. And it's quite important to understand the formation of prismatic structures as I draw. Okay. So let's come back to the question, just a moment. Here. So we have a granular structure that's formed by bioturbation, by mixing of mineral and organic materials by organisms. They are very common in soils that are very and deeply weathered and leached. So I can imagine that granular structures are common in wet regions or not so dry regions. So it's not common to find granular structure in a dry land or areas which evapotranspiration it's higher than the precipitation, okay? And the granular structure is quite common in areas that we have a low activity clay. It's not a low clay content, it's a low activity clay because granular structure is composed by kyanite, iron oxides like goethite, hematite, and organic matter. And the prismatic structure, it's common in areas with we have a high activity clay. As I explained before, they are formed by shrink and shell process, by the variation of water content inside the soil during the wet and dry season. And I only can form prismatic structures in these areas, in areas with a high change of size, a high change of volume of the clay fraction, okay? Prismatic structures, it's also common in dry regions because dry regions favor the formation of high activity clays. In general, I can't find prismatic structures in high areas that register a high rainfall regime. Like I can't find a prismatic structure on rainforest, or is not so common. In some cases, I can find, but they are exceptions. In general, we can't find prismatic structure on rainforests or areas with have a high precipitation. And the prismatic structure is not common in areas that we have a high biological activity because these structures are formed in areas that we have a dry conditions or drier conditions compared to the rainforests. So we don't expect a lot of termites, a lot of ants, and several other organisms inside the soil. They are formed only by physical chemical process of reducing and increasing of water content. It doesn't depend on biological activity. Okay? Has anyone any other question?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So now we will start the first question. Okay, I will share the link just a moment. Okay, question 3. The third question is here. Please access the link and answer the question. Okay, let's discuss about the third question. Just a moment. Let me share my screen. Okay, and now the questions here. The question is, head hues are registered exclusively in iron-rich horizons or layers? Is this statement right? And explain your answer. Okay, to answer this question, we have to think in several conditions. And it's quite common to answer yes, this statement is right, because if I have a high content in horizon of iron in a horizon or in a layer, probably I will have a head horizon, but the statement is not right. The statement is wrong. And we can think in several conditions that show that this statement is wrong. First condition, I can found several rocks that could be weathered and form soils, and the soils formed from these rocks have a low content of iron, but they are red soils. For example, soils formed from limestones. It's quite common that these soils have red colors, had hues. And it is not because the iron content, because limestones in general present lower contents of iron between all rocks. The limestones are formed by calcium carbonate, and they don't present a lot of hematite and goethite in the structure of these rocks. So where come from the red hues in these horizons is because the low content of iron in the soils are composed by hematite. And hematite is an iron oxide that's composed by an iron tree and oxygen, and hematite is formed by the high pH. And the high pH, it's conduced, it's driven by the presence of carbonate in the soil or the origin of the limestone. So if I can find a soil that was derived from limestone, probably the soil is red, but the content of iron is very low. And the soil is red because the unique material, the unique mineral that present color in that soil is hematite, because the other minerals are kaolinite, some quartz, and calcium carbonate. And calcium carbonate, calcite, kaolinite, and quartz, they don't have color, they are translucent. So the only mineral that could present color in this soil is the hematite, so the soil is red. And even with a low content of hematite, the soil is still red because the other minerals don't present any kind of color, okay? And these materials are poor in iron. So we can find soils, horizons, layers that are poor in iron, but they still red, okay? And in the opposite condition, we also can find soils, horizons, layers that are formed from iron-rich rocks like basalt, gabbro, and several other rocks, but they present a yellow color or even a gray color. And why? Because I have other soil formation factors that also influence the soil color. They influence the morphology of the horizon. If I have soil developed from basalt, but in an area that we have a high precipitation, a dense vegetation cover, the high content of organic carbon, the high activity of biological and organisms in the soil could influence the formation of goethite, and goethite presents a yellow color. So if I have a parent material that present a iron content high, even less I can find a yellow horizon or yellow layer or even a yellow soil, because a high intensity of organic material in the soil induce favor the formation of goethite. Okay, so in wet areas, in wet regions, it's quite common to find yellow soils, even in regions that I have a high content of iron. And it, of course, it's quite to understand that relief also influence a lot the color of the soil. If I dig in a tidal area, if I dig in a valley that's quite close to the water table level, probably the soil could be gray. If even if I have a high content of iron, but it's an iron 2, is not an iron 3. So even if I have a soil with a lot or high content of iron, if the soil is quite close to the water table and the water table influence the reduction of the minerals, probably I will have a gray color, not a red one. So we should always understand that color is a very important soil property, but it doesn't represent only the parent material. The color also can represent the organisms, the climate, the relief, and several other soil formation factors. These are just some examples. So we shouldn't think that the color represent the content of iron, okay? Because we have a lot of exceptions. They are not rare. They are very common in the landscape. So just calm down. If you found a red soil or red color, you should understand which climate I have here. It's a lot of rain, it's a dry climate. This soil has a high pH or a low pH. How is the intensity of the organic activity? We have a high content of organic matter or a low content of organic matter. All these properties influence the minerals that we can find in the soil, and consequently, they influence the color that we can see in the horizon. Okay? Has anyone one question about this specific question that we discussed?
Okay. JJ, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Are you
Nibina.
saying that it's not possible for a soil to have one, sorry, for a horizon to have one color? From all your explanation, it's not possible for a particular horizon to have one color. Is that what you're saying?
Could you repeat your question, please?
I said, is it that it's not possible for a horizon to have one color?
No. We can found red colors and yellow, and of course we can found in the soil, in the same soil profile, different soil colors. Okay, we can found, especially in plano soils, we can find a yellow horizon, after that a red horizon, or a red and a gray colors. They could be there, okay, but the red colors are common in materials that we saw in dry seasons, or I'm sorry, in dry seasons not, but in dry climates, when the precipitation is very low and the evapotranspiration is high, so you induce the formation of hematite in this area. The vegetation cover is not so dense, and the organic matter in the soil it's low. So in these conditions, also with I have a material with a low content of iron, I can see a soil that have a head color, that have a head hue. Okay, generally we found red soils in areas that we found a dry season that it's very large, and a rainfall that's lower than the evapotranspiration. We found the red soil colors in areas that we don't have a dense vegetation, and in areas that we don't have a high content of organic matter. Okay, and especially we can find red soils in areas that have a high pH, like the limestones. If you have a soil over a limestone, probably the soil will have a red color. Okay, try to looking for terra rossa. I will type in the chat. The terra rossa, it's a type of soil that's very common in Italy and several places in Europe, and even in South Africa, and they are quite common, found in limestones areas. It's common to produce grapes and wine in these areas, and you will see all the soils are red and have a intense red color. Okay, so you can present some conditions that help to form these red colors, especially high pH and dry conditions with lower dense activity and low vegetation cover. Okay, and the yellow soils you can find in wet areas, and you can find in areas very close to the water table level or in dense vegetation cover. Please, Celeban, open your microphone.
Thank you, JJ. I just want to make a follow-up on that. In a case where we have the red color for the whole profile, or all horizons are red throughout, and the pH is very low, the area, in that particular area, they experience, I think, the minimum annual rainfall is between 6 and 900. Yes. What could be the cause of that very low pH? Thank you.
Oh, welcome. It's a question that we can We can think in several answers. Okay. One of the possibilities is that we have an older soil, an paleosol, that was formed in dry past climate, in a drier past climate. And this dry climate, they favor the formation of hematite, and hematite is red, so create this red soil, okay? Or today, the dry climates forming today had a red soil. Is not a problem to understand that, even with a high pH, but to create this low, oh, I'm sorry, to low pH, but to create this low pH, probably the parent material that formed the soil could be a material that doesn't present a high content of bases, like a sandstone. If you have a soil that's formed from a sandstone, even in a dry climate, it will form a soil that's red, but present a low pH. So it's one of the possibilities, okay? Other possibility is that you can find a soil that has acid mine drainage, soils that have some sulfates and sulfides, and these materials produce a red color and a very low pH, lower than 3. You can imagine it's very acidic, extremely acidic soils. In these conditions, the exposition of sulfides to the air, to the surface, induce its weathering and formation of sulfides, and some of the sulfides are red, so they produce a red color, but the exposition of the sulfides to the air also produce a lot of acidity and decrease the pH of soil. So you have a red soil with a very low pH. There are some other possibilities. You have a dry climate in the past or today, which produce a red soil, but the parent material probably don't have a high content of bases, like sandstones, some clay stones, okay, banded iron formation. These rocks doesn't present a high content of bases, so you easily produce a red soil with a low pH, okay? So you should try to understand which parent material can identify there. With a dry climate, produce a soil that has a low pH and a low content of bases, or we have some specific conditions that produce a low pH and a red soil, like the acid mine drainage. Some soils that present sulfides, and these sulfides, when exposed to the surface, are wafered and produce iron, a lot of iron, and produce, of course, hematite and other minerals that has a red color, but also produce a lot of acid and also produce an acidic pH, acid soil. Okay? Okay,
Okay, thank you.
welcome. So people, we are on time. We need to finish our class today because I have another class now, okay? But in the next class, I will share the last question, the fourth question with you all, so you can think about how soil description influence the interpretation of landscape. And after that, we start to discuss about diagnostic horizons and diagnostic properties to understand how to classify soil. So please start to read the material about diagnostic horizons and diagnostic properties for our next question, next class. Okay? So see you Wednesday. I hope you are well and see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Bye
Thank
bye,
you.
JJ.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye, JJ.